Welcome to Vanadium. I'm Chris Rankin. The more I learn about this mad world, the more mysterious it seems. Those with the darkest influence, you often don't even know their names. They're quietly shifting the ground underneath our feet, so gently that most people don't even notice the change. When it comes to evil, everyone knows the heavy hitters, the serial killers, the mass murderers, the maniacs. But what about evil's long game? What about evil's trendsetters? Its intellectual leadership. For every terrible movement in history, behind every monster, there was a philosopher, an ideological architect, or a mentor, a teacher. Sometimes the teacher and student are separated by decades or centuries, yet the ideas still find their way. It's been said that people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. For those infected by evil, and the many others caught in their orbit, the one thing you'll find is total moral certainty, an absence of doubt about the virtuous nature of their mission. They'll often be acting under a banner of necessity, or security, idealism, or heroism. This is how the worst things happen. Things like unjustified wars, and trusted government agencies betraying the trust of its citizens, of performing dangerous scientific experiments on them, of drugging and torturing them without any crime. It was for security. My bet is that's how the Black Sorcerer, as he was nicknamed, Sidney Gottlieb, went to sleep at night while he was running the infamous CIA MKULTRA experiments and dreaming up new ways to assassinate people. Long before his moment in history, he started his life as an innocent child, one facing some considerable personal difficulty. He was born with deformed feet, which caused his mother to scream out loud when she first saw him. For a large portion of Sidney's youth, he was unable to walk, and his mother was forced to carry him. His parents ran a garment shop, one that a few historians have labeled a sweatshop. After several years, they were able to save enough money for an operation to repair Sidney's feet. It actually took a series of operations that turned out successful. At the age of 12, he was able to walk without braces for the first time in his life. However, even after his recovery, he was still affected by a limp. As time went on, he became the victim of a stutter, one that those close to him blame on the relentless bullying and harassment Sidney suffered due to his foot condition while he was in school. Think about it. The kid had physical and verbal limitations. And back in those days, there wasn't much awareness around the damage that could be done by bullying. Accounts of Sidney's life paint a picture of a childhood marked by cruelty. I mentioned moral certainty is common among the evil. Well, so is pain. Most children, most people, would withdraw into frustration and depression under this kind of hardship. Most people would fall apart. Instead of self-destruction or self-erasure, young Sidney Gottlieb became the embodiment of determination. He excelled where others would have faltered and given up. One thing no one can take away from this man is his strength of character. Many who knew him spoke of Gottlieb's moral character and his sweet, curious nature. He went on to City College in New York, which was called the Harvard of the Proletariat. On a full scholarship, he aced all his subjects, from languages to history, biology, to chemistry and physics, and also took separate training for public speaking. He transferred to the University of Wisconsin for the prestigious chemistry program, eventually receiving a bachelor's with highest honors. He was accepted to graduate school at Caltech to pursue a Ph.D. in chemistry. While a graduate student, he even overcame his stutter, becoming seasoned and polished in academic presentation. He also took up music and folk dancing, both of which would become passions of his throughout his life. He also met Margaret Moore, the woman who would become his wife and partner for the rest of his life. It took Sidney Gottlieb only 3 years to finish his Ph.D. in biochemistry at age 25. That's about twice the pace of most doctoral students. That says as much about his drive as it does about his ability. He took a job at the FDA and then the National Research Council, researching fungal diseases. This is where he became fascinated with psychoactive ergot alkaloids, the natural predecessors to LSD, and the nature of the associated hallucinations. This was the same fungus credited with creating the strange behavior of the citizens in Salem, Massachusetts, leading up to the Salem witch trials. This would be critical in his career. He had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, and was described as a warm and attentive father and husband. His career further blossomed with a position at University of Maryland. However, by some accounts, Sidney Gottlieb was restless, finding the traditional career of research scientist somehow unsatisfying. He loved biochemistry, but didn't see any long-term direction on the academic landscape. At the same time, he was becoming horrified by the Nazis in Germany, and he was experiencing a personal call to action. When he was younger, Gottlieb had even tried to enlist, but he was rejected due to his club foot. Then something happened. Sidney Gottlieb's life was about to change. At age 33, he was about to be offered an opportunity with the CIA to bring his knowledge of poisons and head the TSS, the Technical Services Division. He was given budget, autonomy, and the opportunity to be as creative as he could, to push his drive and abilities as far as they could go. And he did. He became interested in powerful drugs, not just for their lethal response, but for the psychological one. He used his knowledge from his research into fungal hallucinogens in the development of the earliest mind control drugs. Gottlieb developed some of the first enhanced interrogation techniques. His work was a core part of Project Artichoke. Like Q and James Bond, but Gottlieb's creations were generally nastier and generally poisons. This is where he acquired the nickname, the Black Sorcerer. What was happening to Sidney Gottlieb? Project Artichoke was the CIA's secret codename for its in-house and overseas experiments using LSD, hypnosis, and total isolation as enhancements for special interrogations of human subjects. The scope of the project was outlined in a memo dated January 1952 that asked, "Can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will, and even against fundamental laws of nature, such as self-preservation?" At first, the agents in the project used cocaine, marijuana, heroin, peyote, and mescaline, but they increasingly saw LSD as the most promising drug. The subjects who left this project were fogged with amnesia, resulting in faulty and vague memories of the experience. In 1952, LSD was increasingly given to unknowing CIA agents to determine the drug's effects on unsuspecting people. One record states that an agent was kept on LSD for 77 days straight. It should also be noted that Gottlieb himself was an avid user of LSD, using it on hundreds of occasions, and crediting it with the facilitation of philosophical and scientific insights. Gottlieb saw drugs as technology, as tools, and didn't try to measure them on a moral dimension. He realized the morality only came into play when the technology was applied. Even fentanyl isn't evil. It has relieved pain and prolonged life. It was the goals and motivation of the criminals and corporate sharks that made fentanyl deadly. In addition to pharmacology, Project Artichoke researched the potential of dengue fever and other diseases to enhance the war machine. One declassified Artichoke memo read, "Not all viruses have to be lethal." The objective includes those that act as short-term and long-term incapacitating agents. A lot of the Project Artichoke files were destroyed, but some records made it out and were eventually declassified, but with heavy redaction. One of the declassified documents described another one of Sidney Gottlieb's new goals: to study the feasibility of an assassination attempt against a prominent, this part's redacted, politician, or if necessary, against an American official. After American official, there was a handwritten asterisk. At the end of the document, next to another handwritten asterisk, the words "simulated only" were handwritten. Of course that was the plan. Just a simulation. That was a handwritten afterthought. According to the memo, CIA operatives would test their psychological techniques on a foreign national. The country of origin is redacted. They refer to this person as subject, who was once an agency asset, but had since become less cooperative. I'll quote the agency's plan verbatim. Access to the subject would be extremely limited, probably limited to a single social meeting. Because the subject is a heavy drinker, it was proposed that the individual could be surreptitiously drugged through the medium of an alcoholic cocktail at a social party. Artichoke, the hypnosis component, applied, and the subject induced to perform the act of attempted assassination at some later date. All the above was to be accomplished at one involuntary, uncontrolled social meeting. After the act of attempted assassination was performed, it was assumed that the subject would be taken into custody by the redacted government and thereby disposed of. Whether the proposed act of attempted assassination was carried out or not by the subject was of no great significance in relation to the overall project. Sidney Gottlieb's work was the basis for the Manchurian Candidate. The research concluded that despite the elaborate setup, a hypnotized assassination probably could not be undertaken because the subject would be involuntary and unwitting. Access to the subject was strictly limited to social engagements. And this part's interesting. Hypnotism actually provided none or at the very most, very limited physical control or custody of the subject. It turns out that brainwashing someone to commit an assassination is trickier than it appears in the movies. Despite these limitations, the report still stressed that a crash course could be possible. If headquarters provided greater access to operational plans and gave the order, the Artichoke team would undertake the problem in spite of the operational limitations. A final handwritten notation at the end of the document reiterated, this would be made available when and if required. His creative, successful, and frightening experiments were getting the attention of his superiors. Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, gave Sidney Gottlieb control of the newly formed MKULTRA program. This was a blank check to take his research to the next level. LSD had already been implemented in interrogations, but Dr. Sidney Gottlieb had further ambitions. He thought it could be used in covert operations. Since its effects were temporary, he believed it could be slipped to high-ranking officials and in this way affect the course of important meetings or speeches. Since he realized there was a difference in testing the drug in a laboratory and using it in clandestine operations, he initiated a series of experiments where LSD was given to people in normal settings without any warning. At first, everyone in technical services tried it. A typical experiment involved two people in a room where they observed each other for hours and took notes. As the experimentation progressed, a point arrived where outsiders were drugged with no explanation whatsoever. And surprise acid trips were becoming something of an occupational hazard among the CIA operatives. Adverse reactions often occurred, such as when an operative who received this drug in his morning coffee became psychotic and ran across Washington, hallucinating that a swarm of monsters was pursuing him. The holy grail of Sidney Gottlieb's research was to find a pharmacological protocol to break the will and spirit of a human being. This is how far the man had come. To him, the ends were justifying the means. The experiments continued even after Frank Olson, an Army chemist who had never taken LSD, was covertly dosed by a CIA supervisor and 9 days later plunged to his death from the window of a 13-story New York City hotel room. Olson's death was described as a suicide that had occurred during a severe psychotic episode. The CIA's own internal investigation concluded that the head of MKUltra, CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb, had conducted the LSD experiment with Olson's prior knowledge, although neither Olson nor the other men taking part in the experiment were informed as to the exact nature of the drug until about 20 minutes after it was ingested. The report further suggested that Gottlieb was nonetheless due a reprimand, as he had failed to take into account Olson's already diagnosed suicidal tendencies, which might have been exacerbated by the LSD. The Olson family disputes the official version of events. They maintain that Frank Olson was murdered because, especially in the aftermath of his LSD experience, he had become a security risk who might divulge state secrets associated with the highly classified CIA programs, about many of which he had direct personal knowledge. According to Stephen Kinzer, the author of the book Poisoner-in-Chief, Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA Search for Mind Control, Olson had approached his superiors sometime earlier, doubting the morality of the project, and had even asked to resign from the CIA. A couple of other interesting test subjects of Sidney Gottlieb's experiments with psychotropic drugs. These men would go on to make, shall we say, significant contributions. Crime boss and inspiration for Jack Nicholson's character in The Departed, Whitey Bulger, was one of Gottlieb's patients in his younger years. And Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was reportedly another LSD test subject while he was a college student. Gottlieb proposed spraying Fidel Castro's television studio with LSD and saturating Castro's shoes with thallium to make his beard fall out. Gottlieb also hatched schemes to assassinate Castro, including the use of a poisoned cigar, a poisoned wetsuit, an exploding conch shell, and a poisonous fountain pen. Gottlieb also played a role in the CIA's attempted assassination of Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba of the Congo. He took a vial of poison to the Congo with plans to place it on Lumumba's toothbrush in the summer of 1960. Gottlieb also wanted Iraqi General Abdul Karim Qasim's handkerchief to be contaminated with botulinum. Sidney Gottlieb retired in 1972, disappointed, having concluded that all his work over his career had been useless. That, however, did not deter the CIA from awarding him its highest honor, the Distinguished Intelligence Medal, but just before they destroyed the bulk of the MKULTRA files. Stephen Kinzer goes on about Sidney Gottlieb. He was a creator and destroyer, an outlaw who served power, a gentle-hearted torturer. Above all, he was an instrument of history. Michael Isikoff and Daniel Klaidman interviewed Stephen Kinzer, asking him, how did Sidney Gottlieb fit in at the CIA? He answers, Sidney Gottlieb joined the CIA in its early years. In 1951, almost all of the senior officials of the CIA came from a particular social class. They were silver spoon products of the American aristocracy, who knew each other from prep school and the same colleges and investment banks and law firms. Sidney Gottlieb was completely different. He was the son of Jewish immigrants. He grew up in the Bronx. He stuttered. He had a limp. So he was very much of an outsider. Agency officials knew that what he was doing was brutal, was bloody, and was causing an unknown number of deaths. They didn't want to put somebody from their own social class in a position of having to oversee this project that they knew was horrific. Stephen Kinzer goes on, the idea behind MKUltra was to find a substance that would allow the CIA to control people's minds and manipulate them and make them do things they would never otherwise do. And then, if you were lucky, just forget that they had ever done them. Gottlieb decided that before you could just find a way to insert a new mind into somebody's brain, you had to first find a way to blast away the mind that was already there. He used every kind of drug combination he could imagine, plus sensory deprivation, hypnosis, electroshock, and all kinds of other techniques, all aimed at trying to find a way to destroy a human mind. Behind him, he left a trail of wounded and dead in numbers that nobody can even estimate because the records were all destroyed. Apparently, Matthew Modine's character in Stranger Things is based on Sidney Gottlieb. Gottlieb was visited in retirement by the son of his late colleague, Frank Olson. He found him residing in an ecologically correct home in Virginia, where he raised goats, ate yogurt, and advocated peace and environmentalism. Gottlieb and his wife spent 18 months running a leper hospital in India. Journalist Seymour Hersh interviewed Gottlieb shortly before his death and described the man as destroyed by guilt and struggling for atonement. On March 7, 1999, Gottlieb died in his home in Virginia. He was reported to have a history of heart problems, but his wife declined to give the cause of death. Was Sidney Gottlieb evil? Was he? in fact, a psychopathic monster, as some historians and victims of MKUltra claim? Before starting the research for this episode, I wouldn't have bothered to take even a pause before saying, most certainly. However, I believe the situation is more complicated, and in a way, more frightening. I think evil can take root in good people, moral people, people who really believe they're doing the right thing. I believe Sidney Gottlieb thought he was one of the good guys, as most bad guys do. He thought he was working for Team Good, so his actions, the terrible things he was responsible for, were actually acts of heroism, of moral courage, of decency. That's the most frightening part of real evil. This is Chris Rankin. Thank you for watching Vanadium.